The disappearance that broke a town. Ashwood County wasn't just a small town. It was a living, breathing paradox wrapped in tinsel and denial. Picture a place where the air always smells of pine needles and wood smoke, where neighbors know the exact shade of lipstick you wear to church, yet somehow miss the darkness growing in their own backyards. It was the kind of community that prided itself on Christmas spirit, decorating every lamppost on Main Street with red velvet ribbons as if trying to bandage a wound that wouldn't heal. But beneath the carolers' songs and the twinkling lights, a heavy silence hung, a shadow that had stretched over the town for 7 long years. You see, when 16-year-old Lena Moore vanished into the thin, crisp air of an October evening in 2018, she didn't just leave an empty seat at the dinner table. She shattered the illusion of safety that Ashwood held so dear. The truth is often like a stubborn weed in a manicured garden. You can try to cover it with snow or decorations, but eventually it breaks through the surface. Lena was the heartbeat of the Moore family, bright, kind and fiercely intelligent. She was the girl who would stop to help a stranger fix a flat tire or spend her weekends reading to the elderly at the community center. Her older brother, Jake, who was 23 when she disappeared, had built his entire world around protecting her. Since their parents' fatal car accident years prior, Jake had been both father and brother, a guardian standing against the harsh winds of reality. They were a team, tight-knit and unbreakable, like the verses of Silent Night sung in perfect harmony. But on that Tuesday, the harmony broke. Lena didn't come home. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was deafening. It's a terrifying thing, isn't it? To realize that the foundation of your life can crumble in the span of a single hour. If you've ever lost something you thought was permanent, you know that grief doesn't just visit, it moves in. The initial search was frantic, fueled by adrenaline and the collective guilt of a town that believed it could protect its own. Sheriff Marcus Wells, a man whose face was etched with the lines of too many hard winters, led the charge. He had known Jake since he was a scrawny kid scraping his knees on the playground. For a moment, it felt like the whole of Ashwood was united, a sea of flashlights cutting through the darkness of Miller's Woods. But human nature is a fickle thing. When the answers didn't come, when the clues dried up like dead leaves, the town's fear turned into something uglier. They needed a villain. They needed a reason why a good girl could just vanish. And slowly the whispers started. Why didn't Jake pick her up? Wasn't he arguing with her the week before? It's a harsh lesson in human psychology. When people are afraid of the shadows, they will light a fire under anyone just to feel warm again. If you ever find yourself in the center of a storm you didn't create, remember this: the truth is a shield, even if it feels heavy to carry. As the days turned into weeks, Jake found himself standing alone in the center of a nightmare. The same neighbors who had brought casseroles to his parents' funeral now crossed the street to avoid his gaze. It was a slow, agonizing betrayal, sharper than the winter wind. He was never formally charged. There was no evidence, only the suffocating weight of suspicion. But in the court of public opinion, the gavel had already banged. This is where most people would break. They would let the bitterness rot them from the inside out. But Jake had something else fueling him, a burning need for the truth. He knew, with the kind of bone-deep certainty that defies logic, that Lena was out there, or at least the answer was. He didn't just sit and wait for Santa Claus to bring a miracle. He began to sharpen his mind. He read books on criminal psychology, studied maps of the county until his eyes blurred, and learned the art of silence. If you are going through a period where the world seems against you, I urge you to read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It teaches us that while we cannot control what happens to us, we have absolute power over how we respond. Christmas that year was a hollow mockery of joy. The town square was lit up like a beacon, but for Jake, the lights were just glare. He sat in his living room, the Christmas tree unlit, staring at a photo of Lena laughing in the snow. The concept of a silent night took on a macabre meaning. It wasn't a holy silence, it was the silence of absence, but it was in that darkness that Jake made a vow. He promised that he wouldn't let the shadows win. He wouldn't let the lies become history. He realized that revenge isn't about hurting others. It's about succeeding in spite of them. It's about proving that the light of truth is stronger than the fog of deceit. He decided to stay in Ashwood, to live among the people who whispered his name, to be a constant, uncomfortable reminder of their failure. It takes a specific kind of courage to stand your ground when the ground is burning. If you have a dream or a goal that everyone says is impossible, let Jake be your proof that persistence is the only currency that matters. Don't forget to share this story with someone who needs to hear about resilience today. 7 years passed, 7 years of frost and thaw. Ashwood tried to move on. They paved over the bad memories, focused on the high school football team, and threw themselves into the holiday season with aggressive cheer. But you can't bury the past when it's still breathing. Jake had changed. The boy was gone. A man stood in his place, hardened, observant and quiet. He worked odd jobs, kept to himself, and adopted a stray German shepherd he named Shadow, a creature as misunderstood as he was. Shadow wasn't just a pet. He was a trained extension of Jake's will, a loyal companion in a town of traitors. Dogs have a way of seeing the truth that humans miss. They don't care about rumors, only about the heart. If you don't have a loyal companion in your life, consider volunteering at a shelter. Sometimes saving a life is the best way to save your own. It was December 2025 now. The town was gearing up for the grand Ashwood Christmas parade, an event so sugary it could give you a toothache. Jake watched the preparations from his porch, a mug of black coffee in hand. The irony was palpable. They were celebrating peace and goodwill while an innocent girl's fate remained a mystery. But the universe has a funny way of balancing the scales. Just when the shadows seem darkest, a sliver of light breaks through. It started with a letter. No return address, just a plain white envelope tucked into his mailbox between a flyer for pizza and a utility bill. Inside was a single index card with a coordinate and a date, December 24th, midnight, the old sawmill. No signature, just the promise of something that could either save him or kill him. Jake felt a jolt of electricity run down his spine. The old sawmill had been abandoned for decades, a rotting skeleton of industry on the edge of the forest. Why there? Why now? Was it a trap? Or was it the break he had been praying for? He looked down at Shadow, who was thumping his tail against the wooden floorboards. "Looks like we have plans for Christmas Eve, boy," Jake muttered. The festive air of Christmas spirit usually brought warmth, but this brought a chill. Yet there was hope in it. Hope is a dangerous thing, but it's also the only thing that keeps us alive. Think about your own life. Is there a risk you've been afraid to take? A letter you haven't sent? A truth you haven't spoken? Sometimes you have to walk into the dark woods to find the light. He spent the next few days preparing. He didn't know what he would find, but he knew he wouldn't go unprepared. He checked his gear, flashlights, a first aid kit, a sturdy rope. He wasn't playing a game. He was going to war with the past. The town continued its festive madness, oblivious to the storm brewing in the Morehouse. Sheriff Wells drove by once, slowing his cruiser as he passed Jake's driveway, a look of suspicion, or was it guilt, on his face. Jake just stared back, unflinching. He had nothing to hide anymore. The truth was his armor. When you walk with integrity, you don't need to lower your eyes for anyone. That's a powerful lesson for business and life. Transparency is the ultimate power move. If you want to build a legacy, build it on the truth. The night of December 24th arrived with a vengeance. A blizzard was rolling in, threatening to bury Ashwood under a blanket of white. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows. Most families were tucked in, drinking cocoa and waiting for Santa Claus. Jake was lacing up his boots. He felt a strange sense of calm. This was it. The waiting was over. He looked at the photo of Lena one last time. "I'm coming," he whispered. He signaled to Shadow, and together they stepped out into the freezing night. The cold bit at his face, but the fire inside him burned hotter. He wasn't just fighting for Lena, he was fighting for the soul of the town, for the idea that justice isn't just a fairy tale. The trek to the sawmill was brutal. The snow was knee-deep, and the wind whipped around them, trying to push them back. But Jake pressed on, driven by a force that went beyond physical strength. It was the power of love, and the thirst for revenge against the lies that had stolen his youth. As the silhouette of the sawmill loomed out of the darkness, jagged and menacing against the grey sky, Shadow let out a low growl. His hackles were raised. Someone, or something, was there. Jake killed his flashlight. He moved with the stealth of a predator. He didn't want to be the prey anymore. He approached the main entrance, the massive doors hanging off their hinges. The smell of damp wood and rust filled his nose. Inside, the wind whistled through the cracks, creating a ghostly melody. And then he saw it. A faint glow coming from the basement level. A lantern. A fire. His heart hammered against his ribs. He descended the rotting stairs, testing each step. The Christmas spirit felt miles away here. This was a place of ghosts. At the bottom of the stairs, he found a small room, cleared of debris. In the center sat a metal box, old and rusted, with a red ribbon tied around it, a grotesque parody of a Christmas gift. Jake approached it slowly. There was no one around. Had he been watched? Was he being watched now? He cut the ribbon with his knife and pried the lid open. Inside wasn't gold or money. It was a stack of files, police files, and on top, a photo of Lena, taken after she disappeared. The date stamp was from 3 years ago. His knees nearly gave out. She had been alive, or maybe she still was. The files were detailed logs of a cover-up that went deeper than he could have imagined. Names of prominent town officials, transaction records, blackmail. The shadows of Ashwood weren't just figurative, they were an organized syndicate of silence. As he clutched the files, a noise from above made him freeze. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps. He wasn't alone. Shadow barked, a sharp, warning sound that echoed off the concrete walls. Jake realized the trap wasn't the box was the bait. But whoever lured him here didn't know one thing. Jake was done running. He had the truth in his hands, and he was ready to burn the whole town down with it if he had to. The truth always wins, but sometimes it has to fight dirty first. He looked at the only exit, then back at the files. This was the turning point, the moment where the victim becomes the hero. The air grew tense, charged with the anticipation of violence. Jake extinguished the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. He knew this building better than they did. He had played here as a kid. He melted into the shadows, becoming one with the darkness he despised, using it as a weapon. Come and get it, he thought. The Christmas miracle wasn't going to be peace on earth. It was going to be justice served cold. He heard a voice call out, "Jake, we know you're down there. Don't make this messy." It was a voice he recognized, a voice he had trusted. The betrayal stung, but it also clarified everything. In that freezing basement, holding the evidence of a conspiracy that stole his sister, Jake Moore died a final death. And from his ashes, a warrior was born. He wasn't just a brother anymore. He was the reckoning Ashwood County had been waiting for. The silent night was over. The storm was here. And as he prepared to face the figures descending the stairs, he knew one thing for certain. By the time the sun rose on Christmas morning, everyone would know what really happened to Lena Moore. The truth was about to scream. This narrative isn't just a story about a missing girl. It's a testament to the human spirit's refusal to be extinguished. It asks you a question. What are you willing to do for the truth? How far would you go for the ones you love? We often think we have limits, but limits are just illusions created by comfort. When comfort is stripped away, we find out who we really are. I hope this inspires you to look at your own challenges differently. If Jake can face a town of enemies, you can face your obstacles. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see how Jake dismantles the lies one by one. As the intruders reached the bottom of the stairs, flashlights sweeping the room, they found nothing but an empty metal box and a single set of footprints leading into the deeper tunnels of the mill. Jake was gone, but he had left a message carved into the dust on the floor. The truth is coming. The hunt had begun, but the roles had flipped. The shadows were now the ones being hunted. The steel bars of Ashwood Penitentiary didn't just cage men, they caged time itself. Inside, every second stretched like old chewing gum, sticky and flavorless, adhering to the soul until you forgot what it felt like to be free. For Eli Moore, 7 years had passed, not in days or months, but in the slow, rhythmic dripping of a leaky faucet in cell block C. He was a man hollowed out by injustice, his spirit eroded by the constant friction of a lie he couldn't disprove. The town of Ashwood had moved on, wrapping itself in the warm, fuzzy blanket of Christmas spirit every December, while Eli sat in the cold, staring at concrete walls that whispered his sister's name. But change, as they say, is the only constant coup, and for Eli, change was coming in the form of a transfer order. A piece of paper signed by a bureaucrat who had never looked him in the eye, condemning him to a maximum security facility 3 states away. It was a death sentence in slow motion. The warden, Thomas Miller, was a man whose career had been a long, slow slide into cynicism. He had seen every type of criminal walk through his gates, the desperate, the depraved, the broken. But Eli was different. There was a quiet dignity about him, a stillness that unsettled the guards. When Miller called Eli into his office to deliver the news, the air was thick with unspoken tension. The office smelled of stale coffee and lemon polish, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of the cell block. Outside the window, snow was beginning to fall, dusting the prison yard in white, a cruel reminder of the world continuing without them. "You're being moved on the 26th, Miller said, his voice devoid of emotion. "It's done. Papers are stamped." He paused, looking at the man sitting across from him. "Is there anything you want before you go?" Within reason. It was a standard question, a bureaucratic courtesy that usually elicited requests for a phone call, a specific meal, or a cigarette. But Eli didn't ask for any of those things. He leaned forward, the chains on his wrists clinking softly, a sound that echoed like a twisted version of sleigh bells in the quiet office. "I want to see Scout," he said. His voice was raspy from disuse, but the request was clear. The room went silent. Miller blinked, taken aback. "The dog?" he asked, incredulity coloring his tone. "The search dog?" Eli nodded. "Just for a few minutes, before I leave for good." It was a simple request, yet it carried the weight of a dying man's last wish. In a world of shadows, sometimes the only light we have left is the loyalty of a creature that doesn't know how to lie. Scout wasn't just a dog to Eli, he was a tether to the life that had been stolen. Before the nightmare began, before Lena vanished and the truth was buried under a mountain of accusations, Eli and Scout had been a team. They had trained together in the woods of Ashwood, learning to track scents, to move as one. Scout was a German shepherd, with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of the ancients, and a heart that beat in sync with Eli's. When Eli was arrested, Scout had been taken to the county shelter, a prisoner of circumstance just like his master. The thought of leaving Ashwood without saying goodbye to the only being who knew his innocence was a torture Eli couldn't bear. If you have ever had a bond with an animal, you know that it transcends language. It is a connection of the soul, pure and uncorrupted by human failings. Miller sighed, rubbing his temples. He was tired. Tired of the politics, tired of the revenge fantasies of the inmates, tired of the fake Christmas cheer that pervaded the staff room. He looked at Eli, really looked at him, for the first time in years. He saw not a killer, but a man clinging to a shred of humanity. "I'll see what I can do," Miller grunted. It wasn't a promise, but in a place where hope goes to die, it was enough. Eli didn't smile. He had forgotten how, but a flicker of light returned to his eyes. It was the spark of resilience, the refusal to let the darkness consume him completely. This is a lesson we must all learn. Even when you are stripped of everything, you still have the power to ask for what matters. Never underestimate the power of a simple human request to cut through the red tape of bureaucracy. The days leading up to the transfer were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Eli spent his time pacing his cell, his mind replaying memories of Scout, the way he would tilt his head when Eli spoke, the warmth of his fur on cold winter nights, the unwavering trust in his gaze. He thought about Lena, too. The guilt of failing her was a constant companion, a heavy stone he carried in his chest, but mixed with the guilt was a burning questions. What really happened? The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows of Ashwood, waiting to be found, and somehow he felt that seeing Scout was the key. Animals perceive things we miss. They sense the vibrations of intent, the smell of fear, the aura of deceit. Scout was the only witness who hadn't been interviewed. On Christmas Eve, the prison was eerily quiet. The guards were on a skeleton crew, most of them home with their families, pretending that their jobs didn't exist. At 2 p.m., a guard unlocked Eli's cell. "It's time," he said. Eli's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was led through the labyrinth of corridors, the clinking of his chains the only sound. They walked out into the exercise yard, a desolate square of concrete surrounded by high fences and razor wire. The sky was a slate grey, promising a heavy snowfall. And there, standing by the gate with a handler from the shelter, was Scout. He looked older. His muzzle was grey, his gait a little stiffer. But when he saw Eli, the years seemed to melt away. His ears perked up, his tail gave a tentative wag, and then he let out a whine that broke Eli's heart. Eli dropped to his knees on the freezing concrete, ignoring the guard's warning. "Scout," he whispered. The dog pulled against the leash, dragging the handler forward until he was buried in Eli's chest, licking his face, whimpering with a joy that was painful to witness. It was a reunion of two souls who had been cast out, finding solace in each other's presence. In that moment, the prison walls disappeared. There was no Santa Claus, no presents, no silent night carols, just the raw, unfiltered love between a man and his dog. But as Eli buried his face in Scout's fur, he felt something change. Scout's body went rigid. The playful whimpering stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that vibrated through Eli's chest. Eli pulled back, confused. Scout wasn't looking at him anymore. His gaze was fixed on something or someone across the yard. Eli followed the dog's line of sight. Standing near the entrance of the cell block was Deputy Harris. Harris was a fixture in Ashwood, a man who wore his badge like a crown and his arrogance like a cloak. He had been the one to arrest Eli, the one who had driven the narrative of his guilt with a zeal that bordered on obsession. Harris was watching them with a smirk, twirling a set of keys around his finger. He looked like the cat who had eaten the canary, confident in his power, but Scout saw something else. The dog's lips curled back, revealing teeth that were still sharp, still dangerous. The hair on his back stood up in a ridge of primal aggression. This wasn't just dislike, this was recognition. Scout remembered, dogs don't forget scents, and they don't forget trauma. In the lexicon of a dog's memory, Harris was a trigger, a shadow that didn't belong. Eli felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. He looked from Scout to Harris and back again. The pieces of a puzzle he didn't know he was solving began to click into place. Why did Harris hate him so much? Why was he here at the prison on Christmas Eve? And why did Scout, a dog trained to protect and serve, look at a lawman as if he were the devil himself? The truth was starting to peek through the cracks. It's a terrifying moment when you realize that the monster isn't under the bed. He's standing in plain sight, wearing a uniform. "Control your animal," Harris barked, his smirk faltering for a split second. The handler struggled to hold Scout back. "He's never acted like this," the handler muttered, confused. "He's usually so calm." But Eli knew better. Scout wasn't acting out. He was telling the truth. He was identifying a threat. In the world of shadows, the one who shines the light is often called crazy, but Eli wasn't crazy. He was waking up. The warden stepped forward, sensing the volatility of the situation. "That's enough," Miller said. "Take the dog back." Eli clung to Scout for one last second. "It's okay, boy," he whispered into the dog's ear. "I see him too." "I know." As the handler dragged a reluctant, snarling Scout away, Eli stood up. The despair that had weighed him down was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He looked Harris dead in the eye. The deputy didn't blink, but there was a flicker of something in his gaze. Fear, uncertainty. It was enough. As Eli was led back to his cell, the atmosphere had shifted. The Christmas spirit was gone, replaced by the electric charge of impending conflict. He realized that his transfer wasn't an end. It was a new beginning. He had a lead now, a thread to pull, and he would pull it until the whole tapestry of lies unraveled. The truth always wins, but sometimes it needs a soldier to fight for it. Eli was ready to be that soldier. He would endure the maximum security prison. He would survive, because now he knew that the enemy wasn't fate. It was a man named Harris, and men can be defeated. Back in his cell, Eli sat on his bunk, the memory of Scout's growl echoing in his mind. He closed his eyes and visualized the board, the players, Lena, himself, Harris, Scout. The shadows were deep, but he had a flashlight now. He remembered a quote from Napoleon Hill: "Every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. This injustice, this pain, it was the fuel for his redemption." He would turn his suffering into a weapon. That night, as the prison settled into an uneasy silence, Eli didn't sleep. He planned. He strategized. He wasn't just an inmate anymore. He was a detective working the coldest case of his life from the inside out. He thought about the systems of control, the way power protects itself. He needed allies. He needed leverage. He needed to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than the people who put him here. The truth was his goal, but survival was the prerequisite. If you are feeling trapped in a situation that seems hopeless, look for the anomalies. Look for the things that don't fit. Trust your instincts, and trust the instincts of those who are loyal to you. Sometimes the answer isn't in what is said, but in what is reacted to. Like Scout reacting to Harris. Pay attention to the signals. The universe is always talking to us. We just have to learn how to listen. The next morning, Christmas Day, broke with a heavy grey sky. The transfer bus was waiting. Eli walked out, chains rattling, head held high. He didn't look back at the prison. He looked forward, to the road ahead. It was a road paved with danger, but it led to the truth. And for the first time in 7 years, Eli Moore had a reason to live. The game was on, and he intended to win. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens when Eli arrives at maximum security and starts pulling the threads of this conspiracy. The truth is coming, and it's going to be explosive. Share this story with a friend who loves a mystery where the underdog bites back. The door to the isolation cell slammed shut with a finality that echoed in Eli Moore's bones. The sound was stark, metallic, and utterly devoid of mercy, a punctuation mark on a sentence he hadn't finished speaking. Just an hour ago, he had been in the yard, kneeling in the snow, his hands buried in the thick, familiar fur of Scout, his German shepherd. That moment was supposed to be a goodbye, a quiet closure before he was shipped off to a maximum security hellhole. It was supposed to be peaceful, but peace, like Santa Claus or a truly silent night, was a fairy tale that Ashwood County had stopped believing in a long time ago. Instead of closure, he got chaos. Instead of a goodbye, he got a revelation so sharp it felt like a physical blow. The image of Scout, ears flattened, hackles raised, teeth bared at Deputy Harris, burned behind Eli's eyelids. It wasn't just aggression, it was an accusation. Eli paced the small confines of his temporary holding cell, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. His heart beat a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a drum of war in a quiet room. Why Harris? The question bounced around his skull, colliding with memories of the investigation. Harris had been there from the start, a constant, looming presence in the shadows of the case. He was the one who found the evidence in Eli's truck. He was the one who led the searches that always seemed to miss the important spots. He was the one who looked at Lena with eyes that lingered a little too long. At the time, Eli had been too consumed by grief to see the malice masked as duty, but Scout saw it. Scout smelled it. Animals live in a world of absolute truth. They don't understand the concept of a polite lie. If your dog doesn't like someone, pay attention. It's not a quirk, it's a warning. The prison was buzzing with the aftermath of the incident. Inmates whispered through the vents. Guards muttered in the hallways. A dog attacking a deputy. It was unheard of. It broke the monotony of prison life, a splash of chaotic color on a gray canvas. But for Eli, it wasn't entertainment. It was the key to the lock that had kept him bound for 7 years. He realized with a jolt that his entire perspective had been wrong. He had been playing defense, trying to prove he didn't do it. But the real game was offense. He needed to prove who did. And now, thanks to a loyal dog and a moment of unguarded truth, he had a target. When you finally see the enemy clearly, fear transforms into focus. It's like navigating through a dense fog and suddenly seeing the lighthouse. You might still be in the storm, but at least you know which way to swim. That night, as the Christmas spirit bled out of the world and left only the cold reality of December 26th, Eli was transferred. The transport van was an armored beast, smelling of diesel and despair. He was shackled hand and foot, treated like a rabid animal, all because his dog had dared to growl at a man with a badge. He sat in the back, the metal bench vibrating with every pothole, watching the familiar landscape of Ashwood roll by through the reinforced mesh of the window. The town looked peaceful under a blanket of fresh snow, the houses glowing with holiday lights. It was a beautiful lie. Beneath those roofs, secrets festered. Eli felt a surge of anger, hot and righteous. They thought they were sending him away to be forgotten. They didn't know they were sending him away to plan his revenge. As the van passed the turnoff for Miller's Woods, the place where Lena was last seen, Eli closed his eyes. He could almost hear her laughter, feel the ghost of her presence. He promised her then, in the silence of his own mind, that he wouldn't stop. He wouldn't let the shadows win. He would tear down the facade of Ashwood brick by brick until the truth was exposed to the light. It's a powerful thing, a promise made to the dead. It carries a weight that can crush you or forge you into something unbreakable. Eli chose to be unbreakable. If you have lost someone, don't let their memory be a source of pain. Let it be a source of power. Use it to drive you forward when everything else tells you to stop. The journey to the maximum security facility took 6 hours. 6 hours of silence. 6 hours to think. Eli replayed the scene in the yard over and over. He analyzed Harris's reaction. The deputy hadn't just been angry. He had been terrified. For a split second, the mask had slipped. That terror was Eli's greatest asset. Fear makes people sloppy. It makes them make mistakes. Harris would be looking over his shoulder now, wondering what Eli knew, wondering what the dog knew, and a paranoid enemy is a vulnerable enemy. Eli smiled in the darkness of the van. It was a grim, humorless smile, but it was the first real expression he had worn in years. The hunter had become the hunted, even if he didn't know it yet. When they arrived at Blackgate Penitentiary, the atmosphere was different, heavier, darker. This was a place for the irredeemable, the monsters society wanted to erase. The walls were higher, the guards were meaner, and the hope was non-existent. But Eli walked in with his head high. He wasn't like the other men here. He wasn't broken by his crime, he was fueled by his innocence. As he was processed, stripped, and issued a new uniform, he felt like he was shedding his old skin. The Eli Moore of Ashwood was gone. The man who emerged was a weapon of truth, honed by injustice and tempered by the love of a dog. Sometimes you have to go to the lowest place on earth to find your highest purpose. His new cell was a concrete box, smaller than the last one, with a slit of a window that looked out onto a brick wall. No view, no sky, just containment. But Eli didn't mind. He didn't need a view, he had a vision. He sat on the thin mattress and pulled a small, crumpled piece of paper from his sock. He had managed to palm it during the chaos in the yard, a receipt dropped by the handler. It had the name of the animal shelter on it, St. Francis Shelter for Wayward Animals. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He needed to get a message to that shelter. He needed to ensure Scout was safe. Because if Harris was scared of the dog, Scout's life was in danger. Loyalty is a two-way street. Scout had protected him. Now he had to protect Scout. The first few weeks at Blackgate were a brutal education. Violence was the language here, and Eli had to learn it quickly. He kept to himself, observing, calculating. He saw the hierarchies, the gangs, the weakness in the system. He wasn't interested in running the prison. He was interested in using it. He needed a phone. He needed contact with the outside world. And in prison, everything has a price. He started trading, not cigarettes or drugs, but information. He helped inmates with their legal paperwork, used his intelligence to find loopholes in their cases. He became the lawyer, a man of value. And value buys favors. If you have a skill, use it. In any environment, from a corporate boardroom to a prison yard, competence is the ultimate currency. It was mid-January when he finally got his chance. A contraband cell phone, smuggled in by a compromised guard, was passed to him for 5 minutes. 5 minutes to save a life. He dialed the number for the shelter, his hands trembling slightly. A woman answered, her voice tired but kind. "St. Francis Shelter, how can I help you?" Eli took a breath. "I need to ask about a dog," he said. "A German shepherd named Scout." There was a
"I'm
pause.
sorry,"
the woman said. "Scout isn't here anymore." Eli's heart stopped.
"What do you mean?"
he rasped. "He was adopted," she said. "Yesterday, by a local police officer, a Deputy Harris." The line went dead. Eli stared at the phone, the blood roaring in his ears. Harris had Scout. The monster had the witness. It was a move of pure malice, a way to silence the threat and torture Eli from afar. It was a message. "I have everything you love." Eli felt a wave of nausea, followed by a cold, devastating
This wasn't
rage.
just a
Game anymore. It was war. Harris had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He had taken the last pure thing in Eli's world and tainted it with his shadows. But he had also made a fatal error. He had given Eli a deadline. He had given him an urgency that burned brighter than any Christmas light. Eli handed the phone back, his face a mask of stone. He walked back to his cell, the plan forming in his mind with crystalline clarity. He couldn't wait for an appeal. He couldn't wait for the slow wheels of justice. He had to get out. Now. He looked at the brick wall outside his window and saw not a barrier but a challenge. He would break out of Blackgate. He would return to Ashwood. He would save Scout. And he would bring the truth down on Deputy Harris like the wrath of God. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? Breaking out of a maximum security prison. But impossible is just a word used by small men who find it easier to live in the world they've been given than to explore the power they have to change it. He began to train. Push-ups until his arms screamed. Sit-ups until his core burned. He sharpened his mind with puzzles, read books on engineering and architecture from the prison library. He studied the guards' shifts, the delivery schedules, the ventilation systems. He became a ghost in the machine, watching, waiting, learning. Every meal was fuel, every hour was preparation. He was driven by a love that refused to die and a revenge that demanded to be fed. The truth was his North Star, guiding him through the darkness. One night, during a head count, he met a man named Old Timer, a lifer who had been in Blackgate since the 70s. Old Timer had seen it all. He saw the fire in Eli's eyes. "You're planning something, kid," he whispered. "I can smell it." Eli didn't deny it. "I have something to do," he said. Old Timer nodded slowly. "Just remember," he said, "getting out is the easy part. Staying out, that's the trick." It was sage advice. Freedom isn't just about escaping a cage. It's about navigating the jungle outside. Eli listened. He learned from the elders, absorbing their wisdom like a sponge. Never be too proud to learn from those who have walked the path before you. Experience is the best teacher, but the tuition is heavy. As February rolled in, bringing bitter winds and ice storms, Eli's plan began to solidify. He had found a weak point in the loading dock protocol. It was risky, dangerous, and insane, but it was his only shot. He needed a distraction, he needed chaos, and he knew exactly how to create it. He started planting seeds of discord among the rival gangs, whispering rumors, stirring the pot. He orchestrated a riot without ever lifting a finger. It was a masterclass in manipulation, a dark art he had learned from watching Harris destroy his life. Sometimes you have to use the enemy's tactics against them. You have to be the shadow to defeat the shadow. The night of the escape was set for Valentine's Day. A cruel irony. A day of love for a desperate act of survival. As the prison erupted into orchestrated violence, alarms blaring, tear gas filling the air, Eli moved. He moved with the stealth of Scout, slipping through the confusion, invisible and determined. He reached the loading dock, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He hid in a laundry cart, buried under soiled sheets that smelled of bleach and misery. He held his breath as the cart was wheeled onto a truck. The engine roared to life. The vibration was the sweetest music he had ever heard. As the truck rumbled out of the gates, leaving Blackgate behind, Eli didn't celebrate. He lay in the darkness, plotting his next move. He was free, but he was a fugitive. The entire state would be looking for him, but they were looking for a criminal. They weren't looking for a brother. They weren't looking for a man on a mission to save his dog. He was heading back to Ashwood, back to the shadows, back to the place where it all began, and he was bringing the storm with him. The truth was coming home. As he lay there, he thought about Silent Night. The song speaks of peace, of calm. But for Eli, the night wasn't silent. It was filled with the roar of the engine and the beating of his own heart. But there was a peace in his purpose. He knew who he was. He knew what he had to do, and that clarity was its own kind of salvation. This chapter of Eli's journey reminds us that sometimes the systems designed to hold us down are no match for the human spirit. When you are driven by love and truth, walls become doors, barriers become stepping stones. If you are facing a wall in your life today, don't look at it as an end. Look for the crack, look for the way through. And if you can't find one, make one. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video. The next chapter is going to be a high-stakes game of cat and mouse in the snowy forests of Ashwood. You won't want to miss Eli's return. The growl that erupted from Scout's throat wasn't just a sound. It was a seismic event that shook the frozen ground of Ashwood Penitentiary. In the stillness of that grey afternoon, where the only movement was the lazy drift of snowflakes, the dog's aggression cut through the air like a siren. Deputy Harris stood frozen, his hand hovering near his holster, his face a mask of shock that was quickly hardening into rage. "Control that animal," he barked, his voice cracking slightly, a fracture in his usual armor of arrogance. But Scout didn't retreat. He took a step forward, his muscles coiled under his coat, his eyes locked onto Harris with a terrifying intensity. It wasn't the mindless rage of a beast. It was the calculated focus of a witness pointing a finger. Eli, still on his knees, felt the vibration of Scout's anger traveling through the leash and into his own hands. Time seemed to slow down. He looked at Scout, then at Harris, and in that triangular exchange of energy, a realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Scout wasn't attacking a stranger. He was recognizing a scent from 7 years ago. A scent that had been present on the worst night of Eli's life, the smell of gun oil, cheap cologne, and fear. The truth washed over Eli like a cold wave. Harris had been there. The man who had put the handcuffs on Eli, who had testified with a straight face, who had watched Eli rot for 7 Christmases. He wasn't just an observer. He was a participant. Warden Miller, watching from the edge of the yard, felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He had spent 30 years in corrections. He knew the difference between a dog that was vicious and a dog that was provoked. He saw the way Harris flinched, not out of fear for his safety, but out of fear of exposure. It was a subtle tell, a flicker of guilt that a lesser man might have missed, but Miller was tired of the lies. He was tired of the shadows that hung over his prison. In that moment, he made a choice that would change the course of history in Ashwood. He raised his hand, signaling the guards who were rushing forward with tasers drawn. "Stand down!" he commanded. His voice boomed across the yard, authoritative and final. The guards hesitated, looking from the warden to the deputy. "Sir, the animal is dangerous," one of them protested. "The only dangerous thing in this yard right now is the truth," Miller muttered to himself. He walked over to where Eli and Scout were, placing himself between the dog and the deputy. He looked down at Eli, seeing the dawn of understanding in the younger man's eyes. Then he turned to Harris. "You seem unsettled, deputy," Miller said, his tone icy. "Do you have a history with this animal?" Harris swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I've never seen that mutt in my life," he lied, but the lie was weak. It lacked the conviction of the innocent. "Take the prisoner back to his cell," Miller ordered, but then he added the words that stopped everyone in their tracks. "And cancel the transfer." Harris's head snapped up. "You can't do that," he sputtered. "The papers are signed. The state ordered it." Miller stepped closer to Harris, invading his personal space. "I run this facility, deputy, and until I understand why a trained search and rescue dog wants to tear your throat out, nobody goes anywhere, not Eli, and certainly not you." It was a gamble, a dangerous power play, but Miller was betting on his gut, and his gut told him that the Christmas spirit in Ashwood was about to get a lot less festive and a lot more real. Back in his cell, Eli sat on the edge of his bunk, his hands shaking. He wasn't shaking from cold or fear. He was shaking from the adrenaline of hope. For 7 years, he had been screaming into a void, trapped in a nightmare where logic didn't apply. But now, the void had cracked. He had seen it. The warden had seen it. The facade of the perfect investigation was crumbling. He looked at the small window, where the snow was falling harder now, covering the world in white. It reminded him of the silent night when Lena disappeared. The silence of that night had been his enemy, but now the silence was breaking. The truth was making noise. Meanwhile, in his office, Warden Miller was making calls. He wasn't calling his superiors. He was calling in favors. He dug through the archives in the basement, pulling dusty boxes labeled "More Case 2018. He spread the files out on his desk, the yellowed papers smelling of age and neglect. He started reading, really reading, with fresh eyes. He looked for inconsistencies, for gaps in the timeline, for names that appeared where they shouldn't. And there it was, buried in a supplemental report, a patrol log from the night of the disappearance. Deputy Harris had reported being on the south side of town, patrolling the highway. But a witness statement, dismissed as unreliable at the time, placed a patrol car near Miller's Woods, miles away from where Harris said he was. It was a small thread, a tiny fray in the fabric of the official story. But if you pull a loose thread hard enough, the whole sweater unravels. Miller felt a surge of anger. He had been used. His prison had been used as a dumping ground for a man who might be innocent. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "I need a favor," he said when the voice on the other end answered. "I need you to look at something." And I need you to do it quietly. He was calling for backup, but not the kind with badges. He was calling for the kind with microscopes. As the news of the suspended transfer spread through the prison, the atmosphere shifted. The inmates, usually indifferent to the fate of their peers, sensed that something big was happening. Whispers of the dog and the deputy traveled through the cell blocks like electricity. Eli became a symbol, a myth in the making. The man whose dog remembered, the man who made the cops scared. Hope is contagious. When one man stands up, others straighten their spines. The shadows thrive on apathy, but they wither under scrutiny. Harris left the prison that day in a hurry, his tires spinning on the icy pavement. He drove straight to a bar on the outskirts of town, a place where the Christmas decorations were older than the whiskey. He downed 2 shots in quick succession, his hands trembling. He had been careful. He had been so careful. For 7 years, he had played the role of the grieving community protector. He had attended the vigils, lit the candles, comforted the family. He had buried the truth so deep he thought it would never rot. But he forgot one thing. The dead don't stay buried when the living refuse to forget. And he forgot about the dog. Inside the dimly lit bar, surrounded by the murmur of patrons discussing the weather and the upcoming new year, Harris pulled out a burner phone, a device he kept hidden in the spare tire well of his cruiser. He dialed a number he knew by heart, a number that connected him to the architect of his own damnation. "We have a problem," he hissed into the receiver, his eyes darting around the room. "The dog, it recognized me, and Miller saw everything. He cancelled the transfer." There was a long silence on the other end, a silence that felt heavier than the snow piling up outside. Then a calm, terrifying voice replied, "Then you know what you have to do. Fix it, or I will." The line went dead. Harris stared at the phone, feeling the walls closing in. He wasn't just a cop anymore. He was a liability. That night, Eli dreamed. He dreamed of the woods. He saw Lena walking ahead of him, her red scarf bright against the snow. She turned to look at him, her face sad but calm. "Bring him to the tree," she whispered. "Bring Scout to the tree." Eli woke up gasping, sweat cooling on his skin. The tree. The old oak tree near the creek where they used to play as kids. It was miles from the road, deep in the woods. Why there? Was that where? He pushed the thought away, but it lingered. Dreams are sometimes just the subconscious putting together pieces the conscious mind is afraid to touch. The next morning, December 26th, Warden Miller walked into Eli's cell. He didn't have handcuffs. He had a chair. He sat down opposite Eli, looking tired but determined. The circles under his eyes spoke of a sleepless night spent wrestling with ghosts. "Talk to me, Eli," he said. "Tell me everything. Not the version your lawyer told you to say. Not the version the prosecutor wrote. Tell me the truth." And for the first time in 7 years, Eli spoke freely. He told Miller about the night Lena vanished, about the search, about the way Harris had looked at him during the interrogation, not with suspicion, but with triumph. He told him about Scout's training, about how the dog could track a scent for miles, about the specifics of search patterns that only a handler would understand. Miller listened, taking notes in a small leather notebook. He asked questions, sharp, probing questions that cut through the noise. Did Harris ever search the property alone? Was the evidence bag sealed when you saw it? Did anyone verify the tire tracks? With each answer, the warden's face grew grimmer. When Eli finished, the warden closed the book with a snap. "I believe you," he said. 3 words, 3 simple words that carried more weight than 1,000 court documents. Eli felt a lump form in his throat. He had forgotten what it felt like to be believed. "So what happens now?" Eli asked, his voice barely a whisper. Miller stood up, his silhouette framed by the barred window. "Now! Now we stop playing by their rules. I've reopened the internal inquiry, and I've called in an independent investigator, someone who doesn't owe Ashwood County a damn thing. Her name is Maya Sinclair, and if there's a needle in this haystack, she'll find it." The first crack had become a fissure. The lie was breaking apart. Outside, the town of Ashwood continued its post-Christmas routine, unaware that the ground beneath it was shifting. The people returned their unwanted gifts, took down their lights, and swept the pine needles from their floors. But they couldn't sweep away what was coming. The truth is, a force of nature. You can delay it, you can deny it, but you can't destroy it. Like a seed in the winter earth, it waits for the right conditions to burst forth. And in Ashwood, the thaw had finally begun. This chapter teaches us a vital lesson about intuition. Both Eli and the warden acted on a feeling, a gut instinct that something was wrong. In our own lives, we often suppress that inner voice to fit in or to avoid conflict. But that voice is your internal compass. It knows the way when your eyes are blind. Trust it. If a situation feels wrong, it probably is. If a person feels off, they probably are. Don't let the pressure of normalcy silence your instincts. As the sun set on another day of captivity, Eli stood at his cell door. He wasn't looking at the bars anymore. He was looking through them. He knew the fight was just beginning. Harris would strike back. A cornered animal always does. The town would resist, clinging to its comforting narrative. The shadows would fight to keep their secrets. But Eli had something they didn't. He had the truth. He had a righteous anger. And he had a dog who remembered everything. The board was set. The pieces were moving. And for the first time, Eli Moore was ready to play to win. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with anyone who loves a story of justice rising from the ashes. The next chapter will introduce Maya Sinclair, the woman who will dig up the bones of Ashwood's past. You won't want to miss what she finds. Maya Sinclair didn't look like the kind of woman who spent her days chasing ghosts. With her tailored coat, sharp features, and eyes the color of steel, she looked more like a corporate shark than a forensic investigator. But in the underworld of cold cases and forgotten files, Maya was a legend. She was the one you called when the trail had gone colder than a Siberian winter. She had scars of her own, both visible and invisible, that drove her. She understood loss not as an abstract concept, but as a roommate she lived with every day. When Warden Miller called her, pulling her away from a high-profile case in Chicago to a snowy backwater town called Ashwood, she didn't hesitate. Something in his voice, a desperate frequency of truth, hooked her. She arrived on December 28th, driving a black SUV that cut through the white landscape like an ink stain. Ashwood was drowning in post-Christmas malaise, the holiday cheer rotting into grey slush. But Maya wasn't there for the scenery. She was there to dig. Her first stop wasn't the prison, it was the woods. Miller's Woods, the place where Lena Moore had vanished. Most investigators would start with the files, but Maya preferred the earth. The ground remembers what people forget. She brought her equipment, advanced scanners, chemical reagents, and a mind sharper than any blade. She walked the perimeter where Lena's backpack had been found 7 years ago. The official report said the area had been thoroughly searched, but Maya knew what thorough meant in small towns protecting their own. It meant cursory. It meant looking only where you wanted to find something. She moved slowly, methodically, ignoring the biting wind. She was looking for anomalies, for the things that didn't fit the picture painted by the prosecution. And nature, in its indifferent way, had preserved a secret. Deep in a ravine, sheltered by a dense overhang of rock that had protected it from 7 years of rain and snow, she found it, a depression in the soil. Faint, degraded, but unmistakable to a trained eye. It wasn't just a footprint, it was a struggle. The earth had been churned up, consistent with a body being dragged. She carefully collected soil samples, her heart beating a steady rhythm. This spot wasn't on the official crime scene map. The police had never processed this ravine. Why? Was it incompetence? Or was it something darker? The shadows of Ashwood seemed to lengthen around her, whispering in the wind. But Maya didn't fear the dark. She carried her own light. Next, she went to the evidence locker at the county courthouse. Getting access was a battle of wills. The clerk, a nervous man named Jenkins, tried to stall her with paperwork and bureaucratic red tape. "The sheriff needs to sign off on this," he stammered, sweating despite the cold. Maya just stared at him until he withered. "The state attorney general signed my authorization," she said, her voice calm and dangerous. "Do you want me to call him, or do you want to open the door?" Jenkins opened the door. The evidence box for the Moore case was dusty, sitting on a bottom shelf like a shameful secret. Maya opened it with surgical precision. She examined Lena's clothes, the red scarf, the jeans, the coat. And there, caught in the zipper of the coat, she found a fiber, a tiny microscopic blue thread. She pulled out her portable microscope. The fiber was synthetic, polyester blend, high durability. It wasn't from Eli's clothes. Eli wore flannel and cotton. It wasn't from Lena's clothes. It was from a uniform, specifically the type of uniform worn by law enforcement in 2018. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran down her spine. This wasn't just a clue. It was a smoking gun. The killer, or at least the person who dragged Lena, was wearing a uniform. The truth was starting to take a shape, and that shape was terrifying. It meant the predator wasn't a stranger lurking in the bushes. He was the sheepdog guarding the flock. Maya took her findings to the prison. She needed to see Eli. She needed to see Scout. When she entered the interrogation room, Eli looked up, his eyes wary. He had been burned by hope before. But when Maya laid the photos of the ravine and the microscopic image of the fiber on the table, Eli's expression changed. It was like watching a man who had been holding his breath for 7 years finally exhale. "I didn't do it," he whispered, the words cracking under the weight of his emotion. "I know," Maya said softly. "The evidence says you didn't, but we need more. We need to connect this to a specific person." She looked at him intensely. "I need the dog, Eli. I need Scout to walk the woods with me." It was a risky move. Taking a prisoner and a dog out of the facility required authorization that even Warden Miller hesitated to give. But the evidence was compelling. Miller signed the order, his hand steady. "If this goes sideways," he warned Maya, "it's my career and your life." Maya just nodded. "It won't go sideways. It'll go straight to the heart of the lie." The next morning, a strange convoy left the prison, a van carrying Eli, Scout, Maya, and Miller. They drove to the edge of Miller's woods. The town was waking up, oblivious to the fact that the ghosts of its past were about to go for a walk. When Scout stepped out of the van, his nose immediately went to the ground. He was older now, but his instinct was undimmed. He whined, looking at Eli. "Find her, boy," Eli said, his voice choking. "Find Lena." Scout took off, not running, but moving with a deliberate, focused gait. He ignored the squirrels, the birds, the smells of the forest. He was on a mission. He led them away from the main path, fighting through dense underbrush, down into the ravine where Maya had found the struggle marks. But he didn't stop there. He continued, deeper into the woods, towards the old creek bed. Maya followed, her camera recording every step. Miller and Eli were close behind, flanked by 2 armed guards who looked uneasy. The woods felt heavy, expectant. The Christmas spirit here was ancient and wild, indifferent to human morality. Scout stopped at a large oak tree near the water's edge. He started to dig, frantically. Whining and barking, Eli fell to his knees beside the dog. "What is it? What is it, Scout?" The dog pulled something from the frozen mud. It wasn't a body. It was a metal object, a badge. Old, tarnished, half-eaten by rust. Maya grabbed it with a gloved hand. She cleaned the mud off the face. It was a junior deputy badge, the kind they give out to kids at school presentations. But scratched on the back, crude and jagged, were initials, D.H., Deputy Harris. Why was his childhood badge buried here, miles from anywhere? Then it hit her. It wasn't a childhood badge, it was a trophy, or a marker. Harris had been here. He had been here recently enough to drop something, or perhaps long enough ago to leave a signature. Scout barked again, looking up at a hollow in the tree. Maya reached in. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a logbook, a patrol log, the real one. She opened it. The pages were stiff with cold. The date, October 24th, 2018, the night Lena disappeared. The log showed Harris's unit number, 404, logged out at 8 p.m. Location, Miller's Woods perimeter. The official log at the station said he was on the highway. This was the original. The one he thought he had destroyed or hidden. Why hide it in a tree? Because criminals, especially arrogant ones, like to keep souvenirs. They like to revisit the scene of their crime and relive the power. It was his weakness, his hubris. The shadows had concealed his sin, but his own ego had preserved the evidence. Eli stared at the logbook, tears streaming down his face. He was here. He was right here while we were searching, while I was screaming her name. The rage that filled him was purifying. It burned away the last remnants of the victim he had been. He looked at Scout, who was panting, his tail wagging slowly. The dog had done it. He had finished the job he started 7 years ago. "Good boy," Eli whispered. "Good boy." Back at the precinct, Deputy Harris was sitting at his desk, staring at a blank report form. He felt a creeping dread he couldn't shake. The phone call from his mysterious benefactor hadn't reassured him. It had terrified him. "Fix it," the voice had said. "But how do you fix a breaking dam with your bare hands?" He looked out the window. He saw a black SUV pulling into the lot. Maya Sinclair. He knew who she was. Everyone in law enforcement knew who she was. She was the grim reaper of dirty cops. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced his chest. He stood up, knocking his chair over. He grabbed his keys. He needed to run. He needed to get to the woods and destroy the stash before she found it. He didn't know he was already too late. He didn't know that the truth was already sitting in an evidence bag in Maya's car. He rushed out the back door, his breath coming in short gasps. He drove like a madman, sirens off, tearing through the quiet streets of Ashwood. He passed the church where the choir was practicing for New Year's Eve. He passed the school where Lena used to study. Every corner of this town held a memory he had tried to kill, but memories are immortal. When he arrived at the woods, he saw the tire tracks, fresh ones. His heart stopped. He abandoned his car and ran into the trees, stumbling over roots, his expensive uniform getting muddy. He reached the ravine. He saw the disturbed earth. He ran to the oak tree, and he saw the hole. The logbook was gone. Empty. The badge was gone. He fell to his knees, a scream building in his throat that never came out. It was over. The Christmas lights of his life were going out, one by one. The shadows he had used to hide were now turning against him, ready to swallow him whole. But Harris wasn't a man who surrendered. He was a man who fought. He pulled his service weapon. If they had the evidence, they wouldn't take him alive. He would take as many of them with him as he could. He would finish what he started. He heard a twig snap behind him. He spun around, gun raised. But there was no one there, just the wind, just the trees, and then a sound that froze his blood, a bark, a deep, resonant bark that echoed through the woods like a judgment. Scout. Maya, Miller, and Eli were already back at the prison by the time Harris had his breakdown in the woods. They were in the warden's office, reviewing the logbook. The discrepancies were glaring. Harris had falsified his location for a 3-hour window, the exact window of the abduction. Maya looked at Miller. "This is enough for an arrest warrant," she said. "Not just for obstruction, for kidnapping and murder." Miller nodded, reaching for the phone. "I'll call the state police. If we use the local guys, he'll get tipped off." Eli sat in the corner, stroking Scout's head. He felt a strange sense of detachment. The mechanism of justice was finally turning, grinding its gears, moving forward, but it wouldn't bring Lena back. The truth wins, yes, but the victory is always bittersweet. It doesn't undo the loss, it just balances the scales. He looked at Maya. "Thank you," he said. She looked up from her files, her expression softening. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "We have the paper. Now we need the man, and men like Harris don't go quietly." She was right. As the state police mobilized, descending on Ashwood like a storm, Harris was nowhere to be found. His cruiser was found abandoned by the woods. He was in the wind, armed and dangerous. The town went into lockdown. The Christmas cheer evaporated instantly, replaced by fear. Doors were locked. Curtains were drawn. The news broke on TV. Deputy wanted for questioning in more disappearance. The headline flashed across screens in every living room. The illusion of Ashwood's innocence was shattered forever. Eli watched the news from a secure holding room. He felt a primal instinct. He knew where Harris was going. He knew where a man like that would go when his world collapsed. He wouldn't run away. He would run to the source of his power. He would go to the one place where he felt in control, the old hunting cabin on the ridge, the place where he took special guests. Eli looked at Miller. "I know where he is," he said. "Let me go. Let me and Scout finish this." Miller hesitated. It was against every protocol in the book. But the book had been thrown out the window a long time ago. "You're a prisoner, Eli," Miller said. "I can't deputize you." Maya interjected. "He knows the terrain. He knows the man. And the dog is the best tracker we have. If Harris is in the wind, Scout is the only one who can find him before he disappears or kills someone else." Miller looked at the two of them. He looked at the dog. He sighed. "I'm going to regret this," he said. "Get in the truck." This chapter is a masterclass in persistence. Maya didn't accept the no from the clerk. She didn't accept the thorough report. She pushed. "In your life, how many times do you stop at the first obstacle? How many times do you let a bureaucratic no derail your dreams? Be like Maya. Dig deeper. The treasure, the truth, the success, the breakthrough is often just 1 inch below where everyone else stopped digging." As the team moved out, heading towards the ridge as the sun began to set, the tension was palpable. This wasn't an investigation anymore. It was a manhunt. The shadows were long and dark, stretching across the snow, but in the middle of the darkness, a light was moving. The light of a brother's love, a dog's loyalty, and the relentless march of the truth. Subscribe now to see the final confrontation. The next chapter will bring you face to face with the monster of Ashwood. And remember, the truth doesn't just set you free. Sometimes it hunts you down. The hunting cabin sat on the spine of Miller's Ridge like a vulture waiting for a meal. It was an ugly, brutal structure made of rough-hewn logs that had turned grey with age, blending perfectly into the winter twilight. Inside, Deputy Harris paced the floorboards, his boots thumping a frantic rhythm that matched his racing heart. The fire in the hearth had died down to embers, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, shadows that looked suspiciously like the ghosts of his past coming to collect their due. He was cornered. He knew it. The police scanner on the table crackled with the voices of his former colleagues coordinating a perimeter. They were closing in. The hunter had become the prey, and the irony tasted like ash in his mouth. Harris grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the shelf, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. He took a long pull, the burn of the alcohol doing little to numb the icy grip of panic. Why hadn't he burned that logbook? Why had he kept the badge? It was arrogance, pure, unadulterated arrogance. He had believed he was untouchable, the king of Ashwood, the man who decided who was naughty and who was nice. But Santa Claus wasn't coming to save him. The only thing coming up that mountain was a reckoning. He looked out the grime-streaked window. He saw the headlights snake their way up the logging road, state police. And with them, he knew, would be that damn dog. Down on the road, the convoy halted. The terrain was too rough for the vehicles. Maya Sinclair stepped out, adjusting her tactical vest. Beside her, Eli Moore stood with Scout on a short lead. The dog was vibrating with energy, a low whine emanating from his throat. He could smell him. The scent of betrayal was strong on the wind. Warden Miller checked his sidearm, his face grim. "We go on foot from here," he announced to the SWAT team leader. "Eli and the dog take point. They know the path." The team leader nodded, signaling his men to fan out. The forest was silent, holding its breath. The Christmas spirit had fled these woods long ago, leaving only the stark, cold reality of survival. The climb was brutal, the snow was knee-deep, and the wind whipped through the trees, stinging their faces. But Eli felt nothing, no cold, no fatigue, only a singular, burning purpose. He was walking towards the man who had stolen 7 years of his life. Every step was a reclaiming of his power. He looked at Scout. The dog was focused, head low, pulling him forward. Scout wasn't just a tracker, he was an instrument of justice. Animals don't understand the legal system, but they understand right and wrong on a cellular level. If you ever doubt the moral compass of the universe, look into the eyes of a loyal dog. They know where true north lies. As they neared the cabin, a voice boomed out from the darkness. "That's close enough!" A gunshot rang out, the bullet splintering a pine tree just inches from Maya's head. The SWAT team dropped to cover. "Harris!" "Put the weapon down!" Miller shouted, his voice echoing off the rocks. "It's over, John. We have the book. We have the badge. Don't make this worse." A laugh, jagged and hysterical, floated back to them. "Worse? You think this can get worse? I'm already dead, Miller. I was dead the minute that girl didn't go home." Maya crawled forward, finding cover behind a fallen log. She pulled out a megaphone. "Deputy Harris, this is Maya Sinclair. I'm the one who found your stash. I know what you did, but I want to know why." It was a classic negotiation tactic. Keep them talking, make them rationalize. People who commit monstrous acts are desperate to be understood, to frame their evil as necessity. Harris didn't shoot again. Silence stretched for a long, agonizing minute. Then his voice came back, strained and raw. "You think I wanted this? You think I woke up that morning planning to kill a kid?" "Then tell us," Maya pressed. "Tell us what happened. Make us understand." The wind howled, carrying Harris's voice like a ghostly confession. "She was walking on the side of the road," he yelled. "I stopped to offer her a ride. It was cold. I was just trying to be a nice guy, that's all. Just a nice guy." The lie was so thin it was transparent. "But she laughed at me," Harris continued, his voice rising in pitch. "She said she'd rather walk. She said I creeped her out. Who does that? Who talks to an officer of the law like that?" Eli listened from behind a rock, his fists clenched so tight his nails dug into his palms. He remembered Lena's intuition. She had always been wary of Harris. She had seen the darkness in him long before anyone else. "So you got angry," Maya prompted. "I just wanted to teach her a lesson," Harris screamed. "I grabbed her arm, just to scare her, to show her some respect. But she fought like a wildcat. She scratched me. She tried to run into the woods." "And that's when you hit her?" Maya asked, her voice steady, unemotional. "I didn't mean to." The confession poured out of him now, a dam breaking. "I pushed her. She fell. She hit her head on a rock. There was so much blood. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go to jail. Not me. I'm the law." The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. "I'm the law. The ultimate justification of tyrants everywhere." He didn't kill her because he was evil. He killed her because his ego couldn't handle rejection, and his badge made him feel entitled to compliance. It's a terrifying lesson in power dynamics. Give a small man a little bit of authority, and his insecurities become dangerous weapons. "Where is she, Harris?" Eli shouted, unable to stay silent any longer. "Where is my sister?" The sound of Eli's voice seemed to snap something in Harris. "You," he roared, "this is your fault. If you had just picked her up like a good brother, none of this would have happened. I had to frame you, Eli. I had to. You were the perfect patsy, the grieving brother. The town bought it because they wanted to buy it. They didn't want to believe a cop could do it. They wanted safety, not the truth." The confession was complete. He had admitted to the murder and the frame-up. The SWAT team leader signaled his men to flank the cabin, but Harris wasn't done. "I'm not coming out!" he screamed. "I'm not going to rot in a cell like he did!" A flame flickered in the window. Then another. He was lighting the cabin on fire. The dry, old wood caught instantly. Smoke began to billow out, black and choking. He was choosing cremation over incarceration. He was trying to take the final truth, the location of the body, to the grave with him. "No!" Eli screamed. He broke cover. He didn't think, he just acted. He couldn't let Harris die without telling them where Lena was buried. Scout barked and surged forward, snapping the lead from Miller's hand. The dog and the man ran towards the burning building. "Eli, stop!" Miller shouted, but it was too late. Eli kicked open the door and plunged into the inferno. Scout followed, a furry missile of loyalty. Inside, the heat was intense. Flames licked the walls, crawling up to the ceiling. Harris was standing in the center of the room, gun in one hand, a bottle of whiskey in the other. He looked at Eli with eyes that were already dead. "You're a fool," Harris spat. "You should have stayed in prison." He raised the gun. Eli froze. But before Harris could pull the trigger, a blur of fur hit him in the chest. "Scout!" The dog clamped his jaws onto Harris's gun arm, biting down with the force of 7 years of waiting. Harris screamed and dropped the weapon. Eli tackled him. They rolled on the floor, amidst the smoke and the flames. Harris fought dirty, clawing at Eli's eyes, punching him in the ribs. But Eli was fighting with the strength of the righteous. He pinned Harris down. "Where is she?" he screamed into the deputy's face. "Tell me where she is." The roof groaned above them. Debris started to fall. Harris laughed, a wheezing, bloody sound. She's where the water meets the dark," he gasped. "The old well behind the Miller farm. She's been there, waiting for you. Get up!" Eli hauled Harris to his feet. He wasn't going to let him burn. That was too easy. He dragged the struggling deputy towards the door. Scout was barking, herding them out. They burst through the doorway just as the roof collapsed inward with a thunderous crash, sending a plume of sparks into the night sky. They landed in the snow, coughing, gasping for air. The SWAT team moved in instantly, securing Harris. Maya ran to Eli. "Are you okay?" she asked. Eli nodded, wiping soot from his face. "I know where she is," he said. "I know where Lena is." Harris was handcuffed and dragged away, screaming obscenities at the night. The confession no one expected had been delivered not in a courtroom, but in a burning cabin on a snowy ridge. The shadows had been burned away by the fire of truth. The town of Ashwood, watching the glow of the fire from the valley below, knew that their silent night was over. The monsters were being exposed. Miller walked up to Eli and put a hand on his shoulder. "You did it, son," he said. "It's over." Eli looked at the burning cabin, then down at Scout, who was licking a small burn on his paw. "Not yet," Eli said. "We have one more place to go." The recovery of Lena's body was a solemn affair. They found her in the old well, just as Harris had said. The forensic team worked quietly, respecting the sanctity of the moment. When they brought her up, Eli fell to his knees in the snow. He didn't cry. He had cried enough. He just felt a profound, heavy peace. She wasn't lost anymore. She was found. The lie was dead. The truth had won. But the cost was high. Maya stood back, watching Eli. She knew this feeling, the hollowness of victory, but she also knew that without this moment, healing is impossible. You can't heal a wound that still has a bullet in it. You have to extract the poison first. She had done her job. She had shown the light. Now it was up to Eli to rebuild his life from the ashes. This chapter forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality of why bad things happen. Often, it's not a grand conspiracy of evil, but the petty, fragile ego of a weak person protecting themselves. Harris destroyed lives because he couldn't handle a teenage girl's rejection. It's a warning to check our own egos. When we react with anger to a bruised ego, we start down a path that leads to darkness. Be big enough to handle rejection. Be strong enough to accept no. As the sun rose on the next day, Ashwood was a different place. The Christmas decorations looked different now. Less like a disguise and more like a genuine attempt to find light in the darkness. The arrest of Deputy Harris sent shockwaves through the state. The governor ordered a full review of all cases Harris had touched. The system was being purged. Eli stood by the police tape, Scout at his side. He looked at Maya. "What happens to you now?" he asked. "On to the next town," she said. "There are always more ghosts." She handed him a card. "If you ever need anything, call me." She got into her SUV and drove away, a solitary warrior in a war that never ends. Eli looked down at Scout. "Let's go home, boy," he said. But where was home? His house was gone. His family was gone. But as he looked at the dog, he realized home wasn't a place. It was a state of being. It was being with the ones who never gave up on you. And in that sense, Eli was finally home. Don't forget to subscribe. The story isn't over yet. The trial of the century is about to begin. And you won't believe who tries to defend Harris. The final chapter of redemption is coming. The news of Deputy Harris's arrest didn't just break. It shattered the quiet complacency of Ashwood like a stone thrown through a stained glass window. It was late December, the time when families were usually debating New Year's resolutions and eating leftover Christmas ham. But this year, the only topic on anyone's lips was the truth that had exploded from the burning cabin on Miller's Ridge. The town, which had prided itself on being a sanctuary of wholesome values and silent night peace, was suddenly forced to look in the mirror, and the reflection wasn't pretty. It was a face scarred by complicity, by the collective decision to look away when looking closely became too uncomfortable. The air in Ashwood felt different that night, heavy, charged, as if the entire county was holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Inside the sheriff's station, the atmosphere was chaotic. State troopers had taken over, their crisp uniforms a stark contrast to the rumpled, defensive posture of the local deputies. Sheriff Wells, the man who had overseen the original investigation, or rather the original cover-up, sat in his office, stripping the insignia from his collar. He wasn't being charged yet, but he knew it was coming. He had let a fox guard the henhouse because the fox was charming and played on the softball team. It's a bitter pill to swallow, realizing that your negligence is just as deadly as someone else's malice. If you are in a position of leadership, let this be a warning. Trust is good, but verification is essential. Blind trust is just a paved road to disaster. Maya Sinclair sat in the interrogation room, not with a suspect, but with a recording device. She had recovered the body cam footage from Harris's cruiser, the one piece of technology he hadn't been able to destroy in his panic. It was corrupted, damaged by the years and the exposure, but Maya had specialists. They had retrieved the audio, and now she was about to play it for the district attorney. The room was silent. The tape began to hiss, and then a voice cut through the static. Harris's voice, younger, panicked. "I didn't mean it. She just felt, oh God, she's not breathing." The DA, a stern woman named Patricia Vance, who had built her career on being tough on crime, closed her eyes. The truth was undeniable. It wasn't a monster from the woods. It wasn't the troubled brother Eli. It was a panicked cop covering his tracks, aided by a system that valued its reputation over justice. Maya stopped the tape. "You have enough for murder too," she said, "and enough to exonerate Eli Moore immediately." Vance nodded slowly. "Draft the motion," she told her assistant. "We're going to court in the morning. And get the media, all of them. Ashwood needs to see this." Outside, the town was gathering, not for a parade, but for a vigil. They gathered at the gazebo in the town square, the same place where they had sung carols just days before. But this time, the mood was somber. They held candles, their flames flickering in the cold wind. They weren't praying for peace. They were praying for forgiveness. They had ostracized an innocent man. They had let a killer walk their streets, shake their hands, kiss their babies. The shadows of their own judgment loomed large. It takes a lot of courage to admit you were wrong, especially when that wrongness cost a man 7 years of his life. But redemption begins with confession. Eli, still in custody but no longer treated like a prisoner, watched the vigil from the window of the temporary holding facility. He saw the candles. He saw the faces of people who had spat on him, now weeping. He felt a strange cocktail of emotions. anger, vindication, sadness, but mostly he felt exhaustion. The fight was over. The adrenaline that had sustained him was fading, leaving him hollow. Scout sat beside him, his head resting on Eli's knee. The dog didn't care about the politics or the apologies. He just knew that the pack was safe. That's the beauty of animals. They live in the eternal now. They don't carry the baggage of yesterday. We could learn a lot from them. The next morning, the courthouse was a zoo. Reporters from every major network were camped on the steps, their satellite trucks clogging Main Street. The headline, "The Ashwood Conspiracy," was flashing on every screen in America. Maya Sinclair walked up the steps, flanked by state troopers. She didn't look triumphant. She looked determined. She knew that today wasn't just about freeing Eli. It was about indicting the system. She carried a box, Lena's box, the evidence that had been buried in the well with her. It contained her diary, preserved in plastic, the final thoughts of a girl who knew she was being watched. Inside the courtroom, the air was stifling. Judge Harrison, a man known for his rigid adherence to procedure, looked visibly shaken. He had presided over Eli's original trial. He had sentenced him to life without parole. Now he had to undo his own gavel strike. D.A. Vance stood up. "Your Honor," she began, her voice ringing clear, "the state moves to vacate the conviction of Eli Moore. We have incontrovertible evidence of his innocence and of the guilt of Deputy John Harris." She played the tape. The sound of Harris's confession filled the room, ghost-like and damning. When the tape ended, there was silence, absolute, crushing silence. Then a sob broke out from the back of the room. It was Mrs. Gable, Lena's old piano teacher. Then another, and another. The town of Ashwood wept. The dam broke. They wept for Lena. They wept for Eli. They wept for the lie they had lived. Judge Harrison took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. "Motion granted," he said, his voice trembling. "Mr. Moore, Eli, you are free to go. With the deepest apologies of this court." The gavel banged, but it didn't sound like a judgment. It sounded like a bell ringing out the truth. The chains were removed from Eli's wrists. He rubbed the raw skin, looking around the room as if waking from a long coma. He stood up. He didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He just walked to Maya and hugged her. A fierce, desperate hug that said everything words couldn't. Then he looked at Miller. "Can I get my dog now?" he asked. Miller smiled, the first genuine smile Eli had seen on the man's face. "He's waiting in the lobby." The walk from the courtroom to the lobby was the longest walk of Eli's life. Every step was a shedding of the past, the inmate number, the shame, the shadows. He pushed open the double doors, and there he was, Scout! The dog let out a bark that sounded like pure joy and launched himself at Eli. They fell to the floor in a tangle of limbs and fur, Eli laughing and crying at the same time, Scout licking his tears away. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated love. The kind of love that survives prisons and fires and lies. The kind of love that saves you. Outside, the crowd waited. They wanted to see him, to apologize, to make it right. But Eli wasn't ready for them. He slipped out the back exit with Maya and Miller. They drove to the edge of town, to the hill overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. It was beautiful. For the first time in 7 years, Ashwood looked beautiful to Eli. Not because the town had changed, but because he was free to leave it, or to stay and change it. "Here," Maya said, handing him the diary. "I think she would want you to read this." Eli took the small book, its cover water-stained and warped. He opened it with trembling hands. The last entry was dated October 24th, 2018. "I saw the police car again today. Harris, he watches me. It scares me, but I'm not afraid of the dark anymore, because I know the light is inside me, and if anything happens, I know Eli will find me. He always finds me." Eli broke down. He sat on the hood of the car and sobbed until his chest ached. She had known, she had trusted him, and in the end, he had kept his promise. He had found her. It took 7 years. It took a fire. It took a war. But he had found her. The guilt that had been his constant companion finally let go. He wasn't the failure. He was the brother who came back. This chapter is about the weight of truth. We often think of truth as something light, something freeing, but truth is heavy. It carries responsibility. The town of Ashwood now had to carry the weight of what they had done. They couldn't go back to their Christmas fantasies. They had to build a new reality, one based on accountability. If you have a secret that is weighing you down, let this be your sign to release it. The pain of exposure is sharp, but the pain of carrying a lie is chronic and deadly. As the stars began to come out, Eli stood up. He looked at Scout. "We have one more stop," he said. "The cemetery." They drove to the small graveyard on the hill. Lena's headstone was there, simple and grey. But tonight, it wasn't lonely. It was covered in flowers. The townspeople had been there. There were notes, teddy bears, candles. "We are sorry. Forgive us." Eli read them. He felt the anger drain away, replaced by a quiet sorrow. They were trying. It was too late for Lena, but maybe not too late for Ashwood. He knelt by the grave. "I'm here, Lee," he whispered. "I'm free, and you're safe now." "No more shadows?" He placed the diary on the stone. "You were right. The light was inside you, and it guided me home." Scout lay down next to the grave, resting his chin on his paws. He knew. Dogs always know. This was a place of peace. The night Ashwood County stopped breathing was also the night it started living again. Living in the truth. It's a painful rebirth, but a necessary one. As Eli walked back to the car, leaving his sister to rest under the silent night, he knew that his life was just beginning. He had scars, yes, but scars are just proof that you survived. Don't forget to subscribe. The final chapter is coming. We will see Eli walk into the sunrise, a free man, ready to face a future he never thought he would have. You won't want to miss the emotional conclusion to this journey. The morning of Eli Moore's release broke cold and brilliant, the sun rising over Ashwood County like a polished coin. It was January 1st. A new year, a new era. The snow that had blanketed the town in secrets for so long was beginning to melt, revealing the hard, honest earth beneath. Outside the county courthouse, the scene was eerily quiet. There were no news vans this time. They had packed up and left for the next tragedy, and the townspeople stood at a respectful distance, a silent chorus witnessing the end of a play they had unwittingly directed. The doors opened, and Eli stepped out. He wasn't wearing the orange jumpsuit of a convict, nor the grey uniform of a prisoner. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt that Warden Miller had brought him, clothes that smelled of detergent and decency, not despair. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with air that tasted, for the first time in 7 years, completely free. But freedom is a strange thing. When you've been in a cage for so long, the open sky can feel oppressive. Eli squinted against the light, his hand instinctively reaching for a wall that wasn't there. He felt unmoored, a ship without an anchor in a vast, terrifying ocean. The shadows of the cell still clung to his mind, whispering that this was all a dream, that he would wake up back on the cot, staring at the ceiling. But then he heard a sound that cut through the fog of his trauma. A bark, familiar, joyful, insistent. He looked down the steps, and there, straining against a leash held by Maya Sinclair, was Scout. The reunion wasn't cinematic, it was primal. Maya unclipped the leash, and Scout became a blur of motion. He hit Eli with the force of a linebacker, knocking him back onto the stone steps. Eli didn't fight it. He let himself fall, burying his face in the dog's neck, breathing in the scent of fur and earth. Scout whined, licking Eli's face, his hands, his tears. It was an embrace that closed the circle. The story that had begun with a boy and his dog searching the woods in panic was ending with a man and his dog finding each other in peace. The crowd watched, and for many, the sight was too much. They turned away, ashamed of the years they had spent demonizing a love so pure. Animals are the mirrors of our souls, reflecting back to us the best and worst of who we are. In Scout's unshakable loyalty, Ashwood saw its own fickleness. Maya approached slowly, giving them their moment. In her hands, she held a small wooden box. It wasn't evidence anymore. It was a relic. Lena's memory box, the one thing Eli hadn't been able to open since that night. "You ready?" she asked softly. Eli sat up, one hand still gripping Scout's ruff. He looked at the box. It was simple, carved from cedar, with her initials burned into the lid. He nodded. "I think so." He took the box. It felt heavy, not with physical weight, but with emotional gravity. He opened the lid. Inside were photos, trinkets, a dried flower from her prom, and a letter sealed in a blue envelope, addressed to "My big brother, for when you need to be brave." His hands trembled as he opened it. The handwriting was looped and girlish, frozen in time. He read the words silently, his lips moving slightly. "Dear Eli, if you're reading this, it means I'm scared, or maybe just feeling melodramatic. But I wanted you to know that you're my hero, not because you're strong, but because you always tell the truth, even when it's hard. Even when Mom and Dad died, you told me it would be okay, but you didn't lie and say it wouldn't hurt. Promise me you'll never let the shadows change you. Promise me you'll always be the light." Eli closed his eyes, the tears flowing freely now. It wasn't the jagged, painful crying of grief. It was the soft, cleansing rain of healing. She had forgiven him before he had even failed her. She had seen the man he would become, the man who would walk through fire to find her truth. The letter was a benediction from the grave, a permission slip to live. He looked up at the sky. "I promise, Lee," he whispered, "I'm still the light." Scout nudged his hand, as if to say, "And I'm the guardian of the light." He stood up, helping Maya to her feet. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. You didn't just solve a case. You saved a life." Maya smiled, a rare, genuine expression that softened her sharp features. "You saved yourself, Eli. I just provided the shovel." She looked at the road stretching out before them. "What now?" she asked. It was the question that hung over everything. What do you do when the war is over, when the enemy is defeated? You have to learn to live in peacetime, and that is often harder than the battle itself. "I'm going to walk," Eli said. "Just walk. Me and Scout." Maya nodded. "Where to?" Eli looked down the long road that led out of town, past the woods, past the memories. "Forward," he said. "Just forward." He whistled to Scout. "Come on, boy. Let's go." They started walking down the steps, past the silent crowd. No one spoke. No one tried to stop him. They just watched as the man they had wronged walked away with his head held high. It was a walk of atonement for the town, and a walk of resurrection for Eli. As they reached the edge of town, the landscape opened up. The fields were white with snow, but patches of green were starting to show through. The symbolism wasn't lost on Eli. Life persists. It pushes through the cold, through the dark, through the death of winter. He walked past the old Miller farm, where the well had been. He didn't look at it. He didn't need to. That place was a graveyard of the past. He was walking into the future. He thought about Christmas. For 7 years, it had been a time of torture, but maybe, just maybe, next year it could be something else. A time of remembrance, a time of gratitude. He wouldn't celebrate with tinsel and lights. He would celebrate with the quiet knowledge that he had survived. The ghosts of Ashwood would stay. They would always be there, in the rustle of the leaves, in the shadow of the ridge, in the whispers of the wind, but they wouldn't haunt him anymore. They were part of the landscape now, landmarks on a map he had traversed and conquered. He had faced the shadows, Harris, the town, his own guilt, and he had won. The truth had set him free, not just from prison, but from the prison of his own mind. He looked down at Scout, trotting happily beside him, tail wagging at the scent of a rabbit. The dog was older, grey around the muzzle, moving a little slower, but he was here. He had waited. That loyalty was the purest thing Eli had ever known. It taught him that love isn't a feeling. It's an action. It's waiting. It's fighting. It's never giving up. If you have someone in your life who waits for you, a partner, a friend, a dog, cherish them. They are the anchors that keep you from drifting away when the storm hits. As the sun climbed higher, casting long, golden rays across the road, Eli felt a sense of possibility he hadn't felt since he was a teenager. The world was big, it was messy, it was full of danger, but it was also full of beauty. He could go anywhere, he could be anyone. He wasn't the murderer anymore, he wasn't the victim, he was just Eli. And that was enough. He thought about the people watching his story. You, the ones who had followed him from the darkness of the cell to the light of this morning. He wanted to tell you something. He wanted to say that no matter how deep the hole is, there is a way out. No matter how loud the lie is, the truth is louder. It might take time. It might take everything you have. But you can win. You can survive. And when you do, the sunrise will be more beautiful than you can ever imagine. He stopped at the top of a hill and looked back one last time at Ashwood. The town looked small from here, insignificant, a toy village in a snow globe. He realized that the power it held over him was gone. He turned his back on it, facing the horizon. The road ahead was unpaved, winding into the unknown. But he wasn't afraid. He had his compass, he had his light, and he had his dog. "Let's go, Scout," he said, his voice strong and clear in the crisp air. "We have a lot of living to catch up on." The dog barked, a joyous sound that echoed off the mountains, and they began to run, not running away from something, but running towards something, towards life, towards hope, towards the Christmas of the soul, where the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The camera pulls back, rising higher and higher. We see Eli and Scout as small figures in a vast, beautiful landscape. The snow is melting, the rivers are flowing, the world is waking up. And as they disappear over the crest of the hill, into the blinding light of the sun, we know that they are going to be okay. They are going to be more than okay. They are going to be free.